Of recess and ask everyone to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I apologize for us getting out of executive session a little bit later than expected. We will jump right to our first appointment first. We'll go over announcements and public comment after. 7 o'clock, we have the acknowledgement of heroic efforts by two gentlemen, firefighter Austin Flagg and Mr. David Spadafora, that are being recognized by the fire department. I would ask the chief, who has presented us as the Board of Selectmen with letters about the efforts, but if you would describe them for the public, please.
Gentlemen, go on up. Ladies, gentlemen, good evening. I'd like to present to you firefighter Austin Flagg, Mr. David Spadafora. I'd like to present them for recognition from the board for their efforts in the part of a rescue of a victim from a recent structure fire. On Thursday, January 9th, 2014, at approximately 11:45 in the morning, Mr. Spadafora was driving on Pratt Street when he noticed heavy smoke in the area. As he continued down the street, he noticed that smoke was coming from a home at 9 Rennie Street. As he pulled up, he noticed the home had a car in the driveway and a wheelchair ramp and no sign of any people around the outside of the home. Mr. Spadafora quickly surmised that there could very well be someone in the home. He contacted 911 and, without regard for his own safety, forced the front door of the home open and attempted to enter. Though he was quickly pushed back by the heavy smoke and fire in that room, he nonetheless made several attempts to contact any occupants in the home, breaking several windows, trying to see if there was anyone else in any of the other rooms. It should be noted that Mr. Spadafora's call to 911 was the sole call for this incident received by the dispatch center. Firefighter Flagg was nearby and responded directly to the incident, arriving within 2 minutes of the initial dispatch and before any fire apparatus. Upon arrival, he found the one-story home with fire showing from the windows in the front. Mr. Spadafora quickly advised him that he thought someone could be inside, but he was unable to enter due to the fire conditions. Firefighter Flagg radioed in this information to the dispatch center, donned his turnout gear, and proceeded to the rear door of the home. Finding it unlocked, he opened the door and was met with heavy black smoke banked down to nearly the floor level. Through the smoke, he was able to glimpse a leg several feet into the room. Without benefit of protective breathing apparatus, a hose line, or a search rope, and with no regard for his personal safety, Firefighter Flagg entered the home and pulled the victim, Mr. Andre Forrest, out through the door and onto the rear deck with assistance from Mr. Spadafora. Once outside, both men assessed the victim and found him to be in cardiac arrest. They immediately began CPR and, assisted by Sergeant Sean Connery and Officer Sean Zarate of the Lunenburg Police Department, continued care until relieved by other EMS personnel. Though sadly Mr. Forrest ultimately succumbed to his injuries, I feel that their efforts gave him the best possible chance for survival under the circumstances. Though both gentlemen would probably deny it, their actions go well above and beyond the call of duty. If Mr. Spadafora had not located the fire when he did, I have no doubt the home would have quickly been well involved, preventing any possible rescue. In addition, Firefighter Flagg placed himself at no small personal risk entering the toxic atmosphere without benefit of breathing apparatus to effect the rescue. I and my fellow firefighters commend their heroic efforts, and I would ask that the board take time and commend them as well. Thank you.
Thank you. As one member of the board, again, we've had several of these over the past 12 months, and once again, I think we exemplified, your department and the police department exemplify the best in public service and public safety. And to you, Mr. Spadafora, I mean, I don't know what to say as somebody who driving by and getting involved. You know, I commend you for your actions and agree with everything that, from what I was told about the incident from the chief. Agree with everything he said. I think above and beyond probably doesn't begin to cover it. So thank you both very much.
Well, I am a retired police officer from Leominster.
Oh, okay.
I've been through many calls like that.
We won't hold it against you.
Thank you both. I couldn't agree more with the statements made by both the chief and the chairman. You both have exemplified what a caring citizen should do, and your dedication and your care for the people that were in that home and your heroic efforts are greatly appreciated. And we are very fortunate in Lunenburg to have such a phenomenal police and fire department. I've seen the work firsthand, and I can't say how proud I am of our Lunenburg and police fire departments here in Lunenburg.
Can't really add much more to that. I mean, that was in a nutshell. I've said it a number of times. You guys do a wonderful job. Town, we're lucky to have you, and lucky to have you as a citizen, and can't thank you enough.
I agree wholeheartedly. Thank you and congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, very proud.
Thank you.
(7:15), we have a report on the grant application from the Green Communities Task Force.
Do you want me to bother, or you want to? Should I just chat?
They have a copy of the spreadsheet, so,
All right.
yeah, I think that's
Do they need it
fine.
for the folks at home?
Well, I can set that up if you want.
That's okay. Take your stuff.
Do you need time to set that up?
You want to do something else for the moment?
Well, we'll do public comment. If anybody, while you're setting that up, if anybody on the board, any public comment from the board this evening? I do have two announcements. Announcement number one is I'd like to wish it happens to coincide today, I'd like to wish Fitchburg and all the residents of Fitchburg a happy 250th anniversary. I know they're celebrating several venues there tonight, so congratulations to the city on that anniversary. I'd also like to announce that, or re-announce, that the Boys and Girls Club of Lunenburg are having their annual Are You Smarter Than a Sixth Grader fundraiser on March 7th, Friday, March 7th, 2014, at the Lunenburg High School Auditorium, starting at 7 o'clock. We are looking for people to sponsor questions and sponsor sixth graders. You can get all the information about how to be involved and how to participate in this fun and important fundraising event for the Boys and Girls Club of Lunenburg by contacting Michelle Beliza at the Boys and Girls Club right here on Memorial Drive. And a late-breaking one from an email I didn't get, because obviously came after I left my home, is that the schools, Lunenburg Public Schools will be closed tomorrow in light of the expected snowstorm that we are going to have. So Lunenburg Public Schools are closed Wednesday, February 5th. Are you set, Mr. Blatt?
Give me.
Do I have any public comment from the public? I might as well do all of that at once. Okay. It's all yours.
Shucks, thanks, guys. Just trying to get the whole screen in there. Oh, well, I'm not. The easiest part is on the thing. I'd like to thank you guys for giving me a chance to come ahead of you and talk to you a little bit about what the Green Community Task Force has been doing. As you guys know, we have been selected as Green Community. We received $157,200 in grant funding. February 10th is the biggest presentation for us, where we get our signs and our certificate. More importantly, is what I care about is when we get $157,000. I think that's what all of us care about. So what we had to do is we've gone ahead and we've done our first round of of grant application, and I wanted to review some of the items with you that we've done for the grant application. Before I even start, I'm going to just skip all the way over to this column right here, and it says funding sources for other grants, and town contributions. The biggest thing for me that I'm showing here is it's all non-applicable, okay? So what we've done is we've managed to work these programs, and we looked at the first round so that we were asking for actually $0 for the town to do all of these energy improvements right now. So this has been a real win for us. We feel that we're going to be able to do a total projected cost savings of almost, annual cost savings of almost $18,000 a year when we're done, and would have cost the taxpayers in the town of Lunenburg absolutely zero. So this was really exciting for us. So I just want to quickly go through them. A lot of what you're going to see here, bear with me here a little bit. Okay, a lot of what you're going to see here are going to be, I apologize that the screen had to become smaller, but it's going to be replacing some of the lights that we have with LED lights, just basically energy efficient measures, and the big dollars you'll see is going to go in towards the primary school. What we did is we looked at all the buildings we had, we looked at what was going to be easier improvements, and we looked at the longevity, expected longevity of the buildings to kind of decide where we wanted to put the money to start with. So the first building you'll see on there is the library. The library, the main thing is the outdoor lighting in the library. If you've been by at night, some of them are not working as of today. So with the big push is to make these all LEDs. By going LEDs on this thing, we're looking at roughly $458. We think that's going to be more like a $500 a year savings. And as I said, it's not going to cost anything for that. We hope to have that funded and paid for in July. The second thing in the library, if you notice, is that the time clocks and the photo eye is not working. So you might go by there and the lights are on outside during the middle of the day or other things like that. So what we do is going to get somebody in there to fix the photo eye, fix the time clock, and that's going to be almost a $200 savings a year just for that. The next building that we wanted to talk about was the public safety building. Public safety building was going to be mainly converting a lot of the outdoor lights. There's 15 outdoor pole lights, converting those all over to LEDs. We look at that as a projected annual cost savings of almost $2,400 a year. Felt that was a really good project for us right now. The big savings at the public safety we feel is going to be converting over from what we do today is oil heat and oil hot water at the public safety building. We've asked for $5,000 for a feasibility study to look into converting that over to natural gas. As we've gone through this, there's two different entities that could service that with natural gas. We'd like to make it, hopefully get that into more of a bidding war between the two of them as to who actually wants the town of Lunenburg's money versus being stuck the other way around on that. But there's also more things to do, converting the boilers over and other things like that. But we feel with the feasibility study is a good thing at this point for us to look at. The Eagle House was the next thing. The Eagle House is used by a lot of members of this town. The exterior wall packs, converting those to LEDs. Also some interior lighting to LEDs. We felt that's going to be a great savings for the future. The main thing that the benefit of the LEDs is not only just the energy savings, but an LED's lifespan is roughly 20 years. So there's the maintenance issues too. Right now there's a lot of fluorescent lights in that building, a lot of fluorescent and incandescent lights in that building. And as you know, incandescent lights are going away. And as well as we all know who've gone through the CFLs in our life, they don't last the 5 years, 10 years that they tell us. So we wanted to convert over to LEDs wherever we can on those buildings. And the other thing on the Eagle House was to mainly do some insulation and envelope tightening. We felt this was a great time. Right now we have that as a projected cost to the town of $2,000, but we're going to go into the Mass Save program. And we feel that most of that cost will be paid for by Mass Save and paid for by the utilities and rebates from the utilities. We just can't do that. We can't put a cost down right now until they come back and tell us, type of thing, what they'll do. Next building I want to put on here was Town Hall. We looked at both the Ritter building and Town Hall. And right now there seems to be some discussion of what's going to happen with the Ritter. So we didn't really see putting a lot into the Ritter right now. Town Hall, we wanted to do some money in Town Hall because it's used so often and it's used a lot, and we felt that it's used more of as a 24-hour, more of an evening place also. So what we wanted to do on Town Hall was look to converting some of the fluorescent interior lights to LEDs, and then where that makes sense. So in other words, going from more of the general lighting that you'll see a lot of in Town Hall to go more into task lighting and LED task lighting, as well as converting some of the other interior lights that are more for general purpose into high-efficiency T8 bulbs. The other side, and that's going to save us roughly, we feel roughly about $6,600 a year, just in those two things, just in the lighting. And the main thing is, if anybody's ever been through this town hall, been in the attic, or been in other areas in this town hall where you can actually see daylight through it, we want to just do a basic envelope tightening in town hall. Basically put some more insulation in the attic, go around doing some caulking and filling some holes and doing things like that, all in preparation for whatever happens next, whatever we do with the outside of this building and happens next. So that kind of fills in Town Hall. We also have asked for a grant, for a $2,000 grant, just to look at the lighting, how we use the building, what's best to use for task lighting, what best to use for general lighting, and things of that sort. This is something that we feel that this building is going to be used for a while longer. There's been talks about doing a little something to the building, so we felt it was important that we do a little something for Town Hall right now. Most of the money we had was dedicated to the primary school. And the primary school is early in its lifetime. That has a lot of fluorescent lights in there. What we wanted to do is mainly go LED wherever we could. And looking at two things, one is that it's the cost savings that we can do, the annual cost savings, but the main thing was the maintenance. Some of these lights are high up in the air. You don't want to have to come in there and have to fix them that much. And it was going to be something that this is a building that's going to be around for, based on the other buildings we see in town, probably another 40 years. So we felt it was a good time to invest in that building. So you'll see a huge cost in there. We put $96,000 worth of the grant funding is towards that building. There is roughly, 184, over 200 lights, probably close to 250 lights that we're going to be doing. These are also the gym lights, the metal halide gym lights, the sodium gym lights. That's going to be the lights in the cafeteria, emergency lighting, hallway lighting, classroom lighting. It's going to be done over time, but this is something that we really feel is going to benefit from the long haul on that. A lot of the idea there was we have put in some money on this for labor, and we're hoping to get most of the labor from the Monty Tech for most of that labor right now. So that cost will come down in itself too. The middle school right now, there's not a lot we can do with a lot of that is the open windows, and unless we were going to do a major renovation in the middle school, in other words, eliminating windows, things like that, it didn't make a lot of sense right now to do things of that sort. So we looked at the simple cost savings in the middle school. One of them is variable frequency drives for the circulation pumps. We have to really replace an air compressor. We're going to do an air compressor with more efficient, and just a general envelope tightening. Between those projects alone, we think we can save probably close to $5,000 in savings, annual savings, with just those three simple projects. And the final project that we look to fund right now is the Department of Public Works. Roughly they have 500 gallons of waste oil per year between the cruisers, the trucks, and everything else like that. We wanted to utilize that 500 gallons of waste oil, so we would like to have them do a waste oil burner in that building. The projected cost is roughly $10,000, and we feel it's just a savings. Right now, we probably pay to get rid of the oil, pay to get rid of the waste, and this is going to be a great way to just heat the building for the spring, fall, or a mine day, or just in general, try to be more efficient with that building. So I went through that kind of quickly. You have that in front of you. I figured I was opening it more up for questions, if you had questions for us, or thoughts, or any other thoughts, but hopefully I did a decent job for you, guys.
You did a very good job. And
Okay.
I'm very happy that, with all the work that you and your committee have done to get us to the point where a recognized green community, and to get this kind of funding and to do things. A lot of these are just common sense approaches that we wouldn't have the budget for otherwise, and the savings speak for themselves for the project. So, I mean, I'm very happy with all this announcements, and I'm sorry I won't be able to be at the formal recognition, but I know you will be there.
Yes.
That'd be excellent.
Yes. Yeah. I figure, I'm hoping they at least give me lunch. No, I'm only kidding. I know it's a state. I should.
Well, maybe they're watching.
Yeah.
Any questions for Mr. Blatt or comments from the board?
Just a question on this building. You know, we're talking about doing some tightening, some insulation. Did we consider insulating the walls or explore costs on that, or?
So we look at it that we will, the town is able to ask for more, this is the first grant that we're allowed. Once you are a green community, you can ask for a yearly grant, as long as you have the projects. We looked at the outside of the building and felt something had to be done to the outside. So the idea would be to insulate the walls when something was done with the outside. It was going to be a lot easier than trying to do it from the inside out and then repairing the work that's already been done on the inside right now.
I do just have a question on the town hall as well, a follow-up on that. I believe that there was a study recently done, an assessment of the town hall, and then that there's a whole recommendation on a number of improvements that need to be made. And I'm just wondering how that dovetails with what the Green Community Task Force is recommending. If it,
Well, are you talking about the engineer's report?
yes.
So that really addressed structural issues for the most part, not any energy improvements. But, I mean, DPW was very involved in that, and DPW is an active participant on the task force, so any information from that report that would have been relevant to what the task force is doing would have been passed on.
Okay, that's actually one of my questions. So the DPW director has been involved in this because I know that there's some structural recommendations, and I want to make sure that those structural recommendations work cohesively with the insulation recommendations that you're making.
It's the facilities director
Yes.
within DPW who is a member of, or an advisor
Yes.
to the committee.
Yes. Yes. So we have the facilities director for the town buildings, and then the facilities director for the school buildings are both on the advisors to the task force, and both were instrumental in helping us
Okay.
with the buildings.
Excellent, so we thank you. and-
I do have one other thing to address with you guys. One of the things on the task force that had recommended and on the energy efficiency things was the vehicle idle policy. And it just, we had given that to you folks a while, when we first started to be a green community. And we just need to, I would look for you guys and recommendations on how we make sure that gets disseminated down to the different folks who actually use town vehicles. So we had proposed when we did the original building, the original grant funding, one of the ideas on the grant funding was to have some kind of energy efficient vehicles. I don't ask for it at this time. We can approach it again in another meeting, but I just wanted to make, as you guys were thinking, think of ways that would help us to make sure every employee is accountable for, who drives a vehicle in this town, is accountable for those savings.
And as I recall, the police and fire vehicles are exempt from the idling policy when they're on duty. I mean, because,
You're right, when they're on duty, right.
so it would be dealing with most of the other vehicles or plow trucks and other things like that.
But
that
there are
you
some
have.
exemptions for plow trucks as
Right.
well, I recall.
That's correct. There's quite a few. It's just a
Right.
matter of making sure everybody is aware of the policy. That's
Right.
really the thing. That's where we need the help, right? Because we're just a task force. So we always look for the boss to help us out there. Okay. I'm going to get off the stage if you don't mind. No, I'm okay,
I just
sorry.
have one more question on the waste oil burner, and I don't really recall the specifics, but didn't we try this years and years ago with the DPW? Didn't we have a waste oil burner?
I thought we had one that we got rid of
I thought we did too.
through the renovation project.
And we specifically got rid of it because of regulatory issues and smell issues and there. So I'm just kind of wondering why we're bringing it back since we just stopped doing that a few years ago.
I can't recall off the top of my head.
So that may be something that we might want to look at. I'm not sure what we had in place, but I know that we did have some type of burner in place at the DPW, and people
Right.
used to be able to bring their waste oil, and it was
Right.
used for heating.
And there was
But
issues with,
There were issues.
people were bringing in, oil and paint and whatever
Right,
else they might
right.
have and
I
throwing it in.
also think it was an aging unit that was not worth repairing, and it just had, I mean, there are engines from 1970 in your cars that are not, and there's still engines in cars, they're just much, much different, much more efficient. I think that was the problem with that one. It was a really old unit that had issues beyond maintenance and repair, and we didn't want to afford to buy another one.
So I'd just like to understand more about what it is that we're proposing and where the waste oil is coming from. Is it strictly from municipal vehicles, or are we going to be accepting homeowner waste
No.
oil again, or how does
It's
that?
strictly municipal vehicles. The idea is that there's been a lot more improvements on them, as well as that if you're able to manage the oil, the unit will work much better as well as last longer. So we're looking at this for just town town things. We don't want to open it up to everybody because that becomes one more burden on the DPW to actually have to accept it and everything else like that. There's plenty of places people can bring their waste oil. If anybody who changes their own oil has to buy it from some place, and that same place will take it when they bring it back to them. So this is just for the town vehicles that we want to do. This way we can manage the lubricants that are in there.
And we have the regional waste disposal facility over at Devon's that we're a member of.
That's correct.
Right.
Thank you. Yes.
So this grant application was submitted, and due to timing, the chair did sign it. I think it would be appropriate for the board just to ratify the submission, the action to submit the grant application.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? None.
Thank you. Thank you,
again.
folks.
Okay, up next, do we?
Just as
Okay,
presented.
review and approve open space land acquisition criteria.
My name is Sharon Jordan. I'm from the Conservation Commission, and I have a couple of things to present to you this evening for your review and approval. I'm also a member of the Open Space Committee, and the first thing I'd like to talk to you about is the valuation criteria that the Open Space Committee has approved when opportunities arise for acquisition of open space under the Open Space Plan. I want to make it clear that our criteria are only related to open space. Their open space requirements in our plan are very specific. Their value depends a lot environmentally and in terms of passive recreation. We're not really suggesting that these criteria would have other value or not other value for other parts of the town. Other town boards would need to take a look at things that might come available that would be appropriate for them. Carrie, were the guidelines actually part of the package?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I don't want to read everything out to you since you have them in front of you, but it's primarily for the acquisition and valuation of open space when those things become available to us. These criteria, there are 6 of them, are equally weighted, but the requirement in order for open space to consider it a value is that any 3 of those would have to be met. We would still look at each parcel on its own merits. You know, this is not an automatic. We understand that, you know, you need to make an informed decision about parcels that we want to acquire. So our rule of thumb was that a parcel that met any 3 of these criteria would be worthy of further consideration for acquisition by the Open Space Committee. One of those would be a parcel of 50 acres or more. We would not consider anything smaller than that as a really high priority. It's not that we wouldn't consider it, but anything that's 50 acres and above would meet our open space goals, which, as I mentioned, are primarily related to furthering agricultural, the tremendous history that we have here, and passive recreation. It would have to contain, or one of the 3, would be a habitat for endangered species, a wildlife corridor where animals need to traverse that land in order to get from one area where they live to another, particularly if they're rare or endangered species. It would contain important open space resources, which would mean that the public could get to it. It's from an open space perspective, the 2 priorities in our plan are agricultural, the agricultural life of the town, and passive recreation. And passive recreation could certainly not be recognized as a goal if people could not get to it. There are some places, for example, where we have open space, but there's no parking. It's very difficult for people to utilize open space when they can't get to it, when it's only by foot and you have to know where it is. A 4th alternative would be contributing to the natural scenic landscape here in the town, which we all value so highly, or the community character. We are a small town, and anything that contributes to that small town rural feeling is something that is of value in the open space plan. If it's contiguous to existing open space plan, open space land, conservation land, parcels that we're considering might be eligible. The concept of being close to or contiguous to existing open spaces is really, really important. And you'll see that again when I talk in a couple minutes about the land valuation criteria that the Conservation Commission has. Same sort of idea, that that you can go for a long distance on public land is really, really important from both open space and conservation. And the last thing is that it would support Lunenburg's agricultural viability. So when the Open Space Committee hears that there might be a parcel that we would be interested in acquiring, our first goal would be to see if it meets any 3 of these criteria, and then if it does, we would evaluate that more closely. And obviously, the more criteria that any one particular parcel meets, the more important it's going to be to us to really work on the acquisition of that parcel. Acquisition from an open space perspective can mean actual purchasing, looking for matching grants, proposal to actually spend some money to get it. So those are the things that we looked at in the Open Space Committee. We're looking for your review and approval or any revisions that you might like to make to these criteria.
So I'll open it up if anybody has any questions for Ms. Jordan, or through her to the Open Space Committee at large.
Brandon Kibbe from Open Space is here with me, and he and I developed these very closely together and recommended them for inclusion in the Open Space Plan. So if there's any questions I can't answer, I'm sure Brandon could do that for you.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is a great determination factors, and I like the flexibility of being able to pick and choose within those. So I think it's going to address a lot of the various parcels that may come before the town as we go through the years.
Thank you.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that it's a very good criteria. Obviously, as noted in the packet, there are other criteria that may be applicable to other land use boards, and we're going to have to look for criteria from those as well. And Sharon's going to talk about conservation in a moment. But I would hope that we would look for the same type of criteria, for example, from the planning board. But I think that this is a good first step in applying to any chapter land that does become available, or any land that becomes available for open space. I think it's a great set of criteria.
Thank you.
I just have one question.
Sure.
And that is, I realize that whatever number you throw into criteria number 1 would be arbitrary. Was 50 just chosen because it's 50?
No, as a matter of fact, we looked at similar types of evaluation criteria from other communities in Massachusetts that were similar to ours. Some communities looked at parcels that were really, really large, like 150, 250, 350 acres. But when we looked at the actual potential available open space in the town, that's a pretty high bar to meet. So we looked at open space parcels existing in the town, and 50 seemed like a reasonable number. Smaller than that, and it might not really be the highest value to us. Bigger than that, and we weren't sure that it would ever become available.
Fair enough. So do I have a motion on acceptance of these open space land valuation criteria?
So moved.
Second.
I'm assuming you're moving it means approval.
Yes, it means
Okay.
approval.
Have you right there?
All right, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None.
Thank you. So to talk a little bit about a similar idea for the Conservation Commission, they're a little bit different because the goals of the Conservation Commission are not the same as open space. Open space really looks at agricultural value and passive recreation. And while those are wonderful things, the Conservation's particular legislated requirement in, I think it's Chapter 40, Section 8, is to protect watershed and wetlands resources in stewardship from the future, and that includes to try and protect and limit the future use of existing open space and wetlands resources. So from that perspective, the criteria for the Conservation Commission are a little bit different than they were for the open space. So in the particulars for ours and Conservation Commission, we didn't place any particular weight on any of these factors. Any one of them would make the parcel worthy of us taking a look at. Any parcel that met the majority of them would be something that we would really, really be interested in. So just to talk about them very quickly, first, of course, is wetlands. That is the Conservation Commission's primary legislative responsibility under Chapter 40, Section 8. If there are wetlands present on the property, and particularly if they are not otherwise protected, we would be very interested in that parcel. There are no dwellings on the property. That's really key for the Conservation Commission. Our brief is certainly natural resources and wetlands and not buildings. And again, the idea of being contiguous, a parcel that is next to or within a certain reasonable distance of existing open space, existing wetlands, existing trail networks, anything that improves the green space and natural resources of the town would be of interest to the Conservation Commission. Now, that is very similar to the open space plan, but it's so important that we put it in this one as well. The acquisition would be a gift. The Conservation Commission has very little funds available to it. We would have to think very, very long and hard before, as a commission, we recommended that the town actually spend funds to acquire property. So from our perspective, things that are a gift would be far more accessible and available to us and represent more value to the town. And again, from a wetlands perspective and a natural resources perspective, the size of the parcel is not relevant. Now, here's a very important difference from the open space plan. Our brief is to protect natural resources, no matter how small they might be, unless they're otherwise protected. So from that perspective for conservation, the size of the parcel is not really critical. The bigger the better, of course, but we wouldn't turn something down just because it was only an acre or two. If that acre was in a very strategic position, we would care about it very much. And the last is that the prior use of the property, whatever that might have been, it would not interfere with conservation values. That, for example, if we found something where somebody wanted to give us a piece of property that had a burned out building on it, or was a former, motor vehicle dumping ground, we would not be interested in that. So the purpose of these criteria is to give us a basis for judging whether we would be interested in a parcel or not. They're not, any one of them on their own would not be enough for us to say, yes, we think we should be looking at this particular parcel. But if the preponderance of them are met, we would think very seriously about it. So again, I ask for your questions, your review, and your approval for the conservation policy.
And I will open it up for questions again.
And JJ is here with me from Conservation as well.
I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize the stylistic approach of the Roman numeral criteria for the Open Space Committee and the numeral criteria for the Conservation.
It was late.
A very distinguishing factor between the two.
And some lawyer will make a difference in that at some point.
Well, I have to say the open space format is prescribed by the state. This is taken directly from the SCORP, the open space plan, and the formatting of it is something that we actually had no control over. My own formatting, well, I apologize.
I like the criteria difference between the two. I think that it's very interesting and very pertinent to recognize the difference between how the Open Space Committee would evaluate potential properties and the conservation. So I appreciate that distinction, really, because they do have very different, similar but different roles.
The only question that I have, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, is number 4, which is the acquisition will be gifted as a donation. Because I guess the question is if chapter land becomes available to us, and we have a right of first refusal, we're obviously going to look for feedback from open space, conservation, and planning.
Yep.
And in that case, it's not necessarily a donation. So I'm not sure what the rationale was for putting the donation. I understand from a Conservation Commission's perspective, if you were to get a conservation restriction or you were to get granted the property, obviously that's a much easier process than a right of first refusal for the town to actually spend funds. But I'm just not clear on why that's part of the weighting.
It's not, these are all of equal weight, they are all of equal value. So if a parcel met 3 of these 6 and one of them was not that it was gifted, we would work with that. These are not mutual exclusive at all, but they are evaluation criteria. So in our view, anything that we could have donated to the town where perhaps the maximum amount we might have to spend is a tax abatement is a big difference than something where we might have to actually propose an acquisition through a chapter right of first refusal. Yeah, we're not planning to rule that out. I would say that if it was a chapter acquisition, we would be working very closely with the Open Space Committee, because one of the priorities and the goals for open space is to devise a process for handling Chapter 61 properties, before it becomes a time crunch. So we would work very closely with open space. I don't think you'd see conservation doing that entirely on their own.
So as a follow-up to that, one of the things we were looking for as a board in going through policies and procedures was a policy to address Chapter 61. And I'm envisioning that these two criteria that you've put forth are the starting point of that. So when you say you're working with open space, are you working on another criteria in addition to this?
On how to acquire chapter?
Yeah.
Yes, and in fact, I believe Brandon's already shared with Carrie some templates that other towns have used on how they handle the notification and processing of Chapter 61 lands. So yes, we are working on that. It's a separate process. There's
Right,
multiple town boards involved.
If I understand you correctly, I mean, the difference between this is identifying what are the pertinent properties that we should be pursuing, and
yes.
what you just alluded to is a process by how to achieve them.
Exactly so.
Okay.
Thank you for explaining it more eloquently.
And that document is in the packet as well, that sample document.
I do have a question, and that has to do with that criteria. On the open space, it's been made very clear that a property would have to have 3 of the 6 criteria. It does not say that, although I heard you imply that.
I think that, the more, the better, but we were really hesitant to place a minimum number on these, because I think the kinds of lands that come to conservation are not always equally valuable. And we really wanted to leave our options open on this. And, some of them, the criteria, that may be one of these criteria is so overwhelmingly important, the fact that it doesn't meet any of the others is enough to us to consider it. This is not saying that we would acquire it or recommend it. This is saying, do we think it's worth taking a look at? So we wanted a little bit more flexibility on that because of the variety of cases that come before the Conservation Commission.
Well, then, not to be too technical, then if you are willing to acknowledge that there could be a property that meets only 2 of these, but you're willing to really weight them heavily, then you can't on the same token say that they're equally weighted.
It really depends on the property. I mean, we did talk about whether we wanted to say any 3 of these or any 2 of these, and the commission as a whole, could point to so many instances where a situation occurred where one of these would have been of overwhelming importance because of the uniqueness of that particular parcel, that we really did not want to do that.
I don't want that to be a stumbling block. I'm just saying,
Yep.
you may consider, I'm certainly for this as a
Okay.
starting point, and of course, all these documents are living documents anyway, and they can be
Also
amended,
true.
but you may want to consider saying that they're equally weighted if you're, and I understand the possibility that something may come, that one aspect of it is so unique that it really trumps everything else. I understand that. I just think that it should be,
Okay,
you may
I
want to
will-
consider saying that.
Okay?
Mr. Chairman, just on the point of operational, when the town gets conservation land, it's under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. Who's in charge of the open space?
The open space, it depends. I mean, it may be owned by the town. I mean, our normal recommendation, unless it is a playground, for example, which is covered under the open space plan, if it's going to remain as open space, passive recreation, I would recommend that it be given to the Conservation Commission. But, a park is in the open space plan. That would definitely not be under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission.
Thank you.
There's no further discussion or comment, then I would entertain a motion on the Conservation Commission's land valuation criteria.
I just don't think we really need to,
Excuse me?
I don't think the motion's needed by us.
Okay.
I think it's the guidelines they're setting for themselves for how they're going to recommend or suggest we obtain specific lots. I don't think we're
Okay,
going to approve
I'm
or...
just going by, I understand you and I hear you because they're an elected body, not elected body, appointed body, but obviously they're looking for approval, and I just
We wanted to just make everything as clear as possible, and because the open space criteria are so related to the conservation, we thought it would make sense to present them to you as a package.
Well, I think Mr. Matthews is correct. We don't need a vote from this,
Okay.
but I think informally, I, for one, certainly support this criteria.
Yes, I think you did a great job.
As do I. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I just point out, any donations that are accepted under this will need to be accepted by the Board of Selectmen, so.
That is correct.
I think it makes sense for you to vote, because you wouldn't want them to be bringing you.
They're just setting guidelines for how they're going to look at things, so I don't
Okay, well,
I
just
don't
so
think
it's,
restricts us from, either way, we would have to.
We'd have to vote on it.
We'd have to
I guess
vote
the
on it.
question, does it hurt for us to vote in support of this with an idea of that this is saying to us and to future boards, unless they choose to change it, that these are the guidelines that we will follow?
I have no reason to not go along with that. I think, I don't want to give the wrong impression that by us accepting them, certainly the Conservation Commission at their own will can change these criteria because it's their purview. I just don't want to give the wrong impression. I'm more than willing to vote here as long as people don't misinterpret what our standing is for this criteria.
I'd make a motion that we endorse the Conservation Commission's.
Second.
Well done.
What office are you running for now?
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very smooth.
Well, he thought out
Come
of
on,
the
we're
box.
freewheeling here.
Mr. Matthews thought out of the box. We now endorse things.
Thank you.
Why not? Reviewed and endorsed.
Now we move into 3 specific parcels that the Conservation Commission has looked at under these criteria to bring them forward to you for your acceptance, so that the Conservation Commission can go forward and accept these properties. I do have hand-drawn maps, but I only had 1 copy. Did you want me to move forward, Carrie? We have a not as nice a copy.
Good.
Well, we usually have a big map of the town,
Oh,
and that's
that's
not
right.
there.
Yeah, we do.
It's not there.
One at the yard sale.
Carrie, I can. Oh, it's just right
Cleverly hidden.
there. That's not it?
Will that help a little bit, or no?
It might. I can describe where these properties are, though. And I think you'll all know where they are. Okay. So, based on the Conservation Commission's review of parcels that we would be interested in, we have opportunities for 3 parcels to be donated to the Conservation Commission. The first one is at 801 Northfield. You know where that is, right, JJ? Up there. It's up there. Yeah, that's right.
Just to the west of Chase Road.
Right up to Kelly's Pond.
The second parcel is 781 Page Street, which is down over here. Right here. Yeah, right here. It's not on the street's on it. That's over here next to the, not too far from Flat Hill Orchards. The third parcel is at 30 Rennie Street, which is right down, right there. In all 3 cases, all of the criteria that conservation looks at in terms of deciding whether it's a parcel we're interested in are met. In the case of, remember, let's see, the sizes are 801 Northfield is a little over 6 acres, 781 Page is about 5 acres, and 30 Rennie is 2 acres. All three of them are, have wetlands present on them that are not otherwise protected. All three of them would be a donation or a gift to the town. All three of them have no issue with prior use of the property. All three of them are contiguous to existing open space or conservation land, or very close to it. And in fact, in the case of the properties on Northfield and Page, they represent the only access to trail networks and open space. At Northfield, that land would give us access to the 60 acres or so conservation land on Chase Road. Although that conservation land borders Chase Road, the access from Chase is impossible. It's a cliff. You can't get to it. So one of the things we were talking about before was the importance of being contiguous. That parcel there would give us access to that 60 acres that we can't get to now. And even more importantly, it's a potential Eagle Scout project. We are always getting requests from the Boy Scouts for Eagle Scout projects because they look for things that are environmentally aware. And this would be a perfect place for an Eagle Scout project to put a small trail in to access that. We look for projects that are manageable in size for the Boy Scouts, but would be meaningful. So that would go on the list. So that's a huge public benefit right there. The parcel on Page Street is absolutely critical to the town's trail network. It is close to the Flat Hill Orchards. It's near Beaver Pond, and it also accesses Shirley Conservation Land. It's completely landlocked. There is no development potential for it. In this particular situation, a family actually thought that it had been donated a long time ago, but there was a misstep on the address of the bills, and they never realized that although it had been taken for tax purposes, the second step of taking it to land court had not actually been completed. I do have information on the tax valuation of each of these. We would be asking for an abatement in order to acquire them. The 801 Northfield, actually there's a credit on that right now. It was overpaid a little bit, but it's about $400 that would have to be taken out of the expectation before the end of this fiscal year. The same is true for 30 Rennie. There's about $400 that's in the budget right now, anticipated to be received before the end of the fiscal year. That is a developable property. It's the only one of the three that could potentially be developable, but there's a lot of wetlands on it, and it also is a huge open space. You can see it's prime forest and prime field land according to the state overlay maps on environmental importance, and the views go for a half a mile or more. And on both sides, it's next to 60 to 80 acres of town land and conservation land. So we feel that that would be of value to the town for acquiring. The 781 Page property has the greatest amount of outstanding taxes because it's been accruing since 2008, and I'm sorry, 2003 actually. It's about $1,800 that we will be asking for an abatement in order to accept that gift for conservation. So I'm sure you have a lot of questions on these, so.
Open up the floor to the board. Any questions? I will ask one question. I see you have a question,
No,
Ms.
I
Bertram. I just
don't,
want to ask one
actually.
question of the town manager. I mean, the amounts we're talking about sounds like we're totaling $2,600. Does this pose a problem in your budgeting or budgeting process?
It doesn't pose a problem, but the 781 Page Street, because of the age of the delinquency, we actually have to apply to the State Department of Revenue for approval to abate. That can't be abated locally.
And the abatement process, if we recommend that we go forward with acquiring this, that the Conservation Commission acquire this property, the abatement process is through the Board of Assessors, correct?
It's through the Board of Assessors up to a certain period of time, and then after that, it would have to go to the state.
Okay.
It's 2 years, I believe. We have had a few conversations with Harold Scheid about this particular property. He was comfortable that there would be no issue with the abatement process on this one.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I want to thank the Conservation Commission for all their work on these properties, and knowing how important meaningful access is for trails. I want to thank you for all of this work, and I think that we absolutely should move forward with acquiring these property for conservation purposes.
I would echo the same.
And I would echo it and encourage whatever we can do to market this as an opportunity for people to donate the land that meets the criteria to the town, because quite often people don't realize they can. And whether it's on the website or however we do it would be a great way to market that.
Well, I would entertain a motion on these donations as denoted by the Conservation Commission.
I would make a motion that we accept the donation of the land that was outlined by Mrs. Jordan for 801 Northfield Road, 781 Page Street, and 30 Rennie Street.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Really-
you.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate your support, and I hope maybe in the future we can come back with more parcels that will help add value to the town. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, we have an update on the status of the Eagle Heights project with RCAP Solutions and John Jewell making their way to the forefront.
That's right. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm going to do a kind of update in regards to the challenges and the complexity of this particular project in light of the demise of the 202 program. Paul's been working at the national level with Congressman McGovern and other representatives of the federal government in regards to whether that program is going to, in the near future, ever come back to what it was. And what it's left, basically, I guess the answer at this particular point is no, right?
No.
In terms of that.
That's right.
But that he's going to actually go down in March and continue to lobby in terms of senior housing in general. Especially since some of the financing that we're going to talk about in regards to what will work for this Eagle Heights project is related to federal and state financing. So I guess the challenge has been, since we last met with you, is to find the mechanism and the model that would work in relationship to this project. And we have found it from discussions with DHCD and discussions and working with MHP, Mass Housing Partnership, and Mass Development, and with Carrie's assistance, who in the fall met with Mass Development with us to talk about their tax-exempt bond program, as well as the 4% credit, low-income housing tax credit that goes with it. But it also brought up some interesting challenges of what this new program or not new, but basically pulling all these resources that the state talked about in to fill the gap in terms of senior housing as it competes with family housing, veterans housing, and homeless funding in the state's eyes. What we found is that basically the tax-exempt bond program does provide a substantial amount of construction and financing, and but with the caveat from Mass Development that we had to find a bank or another financial institution that would underwrite those bonds, as well as work with the state on the 4% low-income housing tax credits, the state low-income housing tax credits that recently got funded to the tune of $50 million in November, as well as a housing bond bill that was passed for $1.4 billion, and using those resources as well as historic and state historic tax credits and affordable housing trust funds and housing stabilization funds. All those had a mesh in terms of trying to make this project work. And we've been, the key has been in relationship to this that we have find a bank, and we went to Bank of America and asked them if they would underwrite this project in terms of the tax-exempt bonds. They had a lot of other projects closer to Boston in their region that they influence, and they turned us down. So with the help of a Mass Housing Partnership, we were able to find two institutions, one very local here who's expressed very interest in Northern Middlesex Savings Bank, who might underwrite the project, as well as another financial institution, actually insurance fund, that would do what we need to have done to make this thing work. And so over the last several months, we've kind of been working with them to finalize the financing on how this would ultimately work in terms of this model and allow this project to move forward to get the housing that we all, RCAP and J. & Jewell Associates really wants to have in terms of senior housing for this, this town. And we think we now have the model that'll work, and we were beginning to proceed with all these institutions to flush out any other details in order to make the project work, particularly with the financing that we now have identified and is in place. Do you want to say anything else?
No, I think well said.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's our challenge. I guess if you have any other questions in relationship to that, that's who we're currently working with. Most likely, you know, we needed a permanent lender. And the challenge is really because the tax-exempt bonds that we are looking at require us to take 50% of the total development cost and purchase for those bonds. And we had to need a takeout of permanent financing, and that's only going to take a fraction of the actual bonds out. And so the 4% equity that we raised through the tax credits and the state historic the state low-income housing tax credits and the historic tax credits do the other amount in terms of actually getting enough equity to make all this work. It will take some time to get, you know, going through the process with all the different state agencies, but this is the model that now the state looks to in terms of having senior housing built, in light of the fact that the 202, which was a much simpler process, I'll mind you, allowed it to be more of a one-stop shopping than it is now.
So what is the time frame that you're looking at?
Well, at this point, we're looking over the next several months to be pulling all the different financing lenders and applying to different financing sources, and the key being the state and historic tax credits, because those fundings go through Mass Historical Commission, and those are allocated in funding rounds, and they provide those funding round. The funding for the tax credits are actually done in incremental phases. And you must get up to 67% committed in order for the state to then finance the rest of the project through the other avenues I talked about. So in the next 6 to 8 months, we will be working with on the applications for the state and federal historic tax credits, and we will be also working with Mass Housing Partnership on the permanent financing, and with Mass Development on the bonds, and with these financial institutions in terms of getting those underwriting criteria taken care of, so that we're all set once the commitments from the state historic tax credits and federal tax credits are in place, that we would get all the different financing, and hopefully by 2015, we would have the financing that would be necessary to build this project. Now, that's our hope, and as you can see, that it's, you know, even explaining it in a summary form is pretty complex array of financing that, but the encouraging thing is that there is the financing. The state has put the bond bill in place, and they have the funding now through the state low-income housing tax credit program, which really had been drained the last time we talked. And that being refurbished basically allows a significant important financing piece to be in place that wasn't there when we talked last time. So the challenge is to continue to work with all these different lenders, of which, you know, and get this project financed and built for the benefit of the senior housing community who supported us all this time. And you have as well, and I appreciate that.
Mrs. Bertram.
The last time that we talked, you had mentioned that our application, and obviously that program, that's moot at this point. However, you were looking for some concessions on the part of the town for things such as sewer fees, for building permit fees. There was also a big debate about the taxes associated with the project, and you were looking for a pilot. Are you still looking for all of those things, and do you have a criteria or you know, what it is that you're looking for concessions from the town?
The answer is even more so. With this change in financing, the state is looking for a local match, and it's become almost critical to that. Actually, in the discussion I had with DHCD last week, there were two issues that came up in regards to my discussion on Lunenburg. One was that whether in doing and putting financing together for a senior housing project, had Lunenburg done a substantial amount of affordable housing for families? And my answer to them, thanks to Carrie's input, was that yes, they had. And then I reminded them of the Tri-Landing project and some of the other projects that you had accomplished, and therefore that issue was put to bed. That was the first and foremost, or we wouldn't even be talking with the state at this particular point. The second one was the critical component of the local match, and the fact that the state now has to go through all these different pots in order to get the financing necessary for senior housing. How and what would the town be doing in relationship to providing that? Well, I mentioned the fact that the building, you had offered the building as a part of that. They asked if I had CPC funds in relationship to, and that whether this is a community preservation community, and I said no, but the town had talked extensively about these kind of waivers and possible financial concessions in terms of sewer connections. I talked about the sewer line that the town had graciously proposed to extend to the School Street project to make that work, and that would be contributing as well. But the underlying theme I heard was that basically this is all a critical component in relationship to how this financing ultimately gets financed. The more complete the local commitment, the more support, which has never been in doubt in this particular case in terms of the senior community and the Board of Selectmen, that will play a critical role in terms of how fast this gets financed. You think?
Yep.
So the short answer is that they'd be looking for a donation of the property. The question is whether they're going to be looking for cash.
Cash has been asked before in regard to that. That's how towns, that's how this is working at this particular point.
And what do you see as the tax revenue from this project, or are you still looking for a pilot agreement? And what type of pilot agreement would you be looking? What type of pilot agreement would you be looking for?
Well, we're still figuring out. We just got recently those two financial institutions to agree to consider underwriting the bonds, and we're working through the financing on those. And so I have to get back to you in regards to what the final numbers will look at, because actually I have a couple of discussions in the next couple of weeks with both financial institutions to find out what all their criteria would be in relationship to the underwriting and the costs that are involved in that. That's one of the problems that we're that I see on this, is that there's a lot of additional fee structure built into the bonds and so forth that we have to account for.
So effectively, it's similar to a friendly 40B in that they look at what's the reasonable cost and what it's going to cost, and therefore I'm assuming there's a certain amount of negotiation that's going to go back and forth.
Well, I have a concern regarding that, because our assessor has been adamant throughout this process that this particular type of project is not eligible for a pilot, and that it needs to be it needs to be assessed based on a specific formula. So I think we do need some more information from the assessor on whether or not they're willing to accept a pilot agreement or feel that it can be done on this particular project. And I'll be honest with you, I'm very concerned about the length of time this is taking, the fact that the building remains empty. And obviously, I'm concerned about the continuing value of that property as we leave it vacant. And I also am concerned about the financial constraints. I mean, the more concessions we look for from the town, the more I think difficult this project is going to be. While I see the need and support the need for senior housing, and I think it's an ideal spot, I also think that we, are facing a very difficult economic time. And while I'm thrilled that the town supported the school, that is going to make revenue more difficult. And when we talk about concessions from the Sewer Commission, or we talk about sewer extensions, our sewer runs on an enterprise fund, and it is funded by the people that utilize that sewer. So the ability for the sewer to make concessions is limited, and we also pay a portion of any connection to another municipality. So, when we talk about sewer concessions, I mean, obviously that's up to the sewer commission. But as, a citizen looking in, and I'm not a sewer user, but everyone that connects to the sewer has to pay their fair share. So when we're talking about concessions for this type of development, it raises a red flag to me. While I see the need, I also think we also have to put the needs of everyone else, of the other citizens, of equal value. And I'm concerned about the potential costs we're talking about for the town of Lunenburg.
I think that the sewer they weren't waiving the connection fee because they were going to have to pay that to Leominster. It was the extension of the pipe, which was going to be able to pay out of project funds. But I think that the question is, housing takes a long time to build. You've effectively restarted the clock when the 202 program went away, so it's almost as if it started again when that was turned down. It normally takes 1.5 to 3 years for housing to get through the pipeline at the state level to go through all the different funding sources. So the question becomes of the better the application, which means the more T's crossed and I's dotted and money in the bank from the fact that you have 2 funders is really important. That wouldn't go forward at that. But the sooner we know, I echo Mrs. Bertram's comments about knowing what we need to do, the sooner you'll know whether we're going to be able to say yes or not.
Well, one of the things, before you respond, I mean, one of the things, I'm glad that Mrs. Bertram and Mr. Ebersol said what they did, because I certainly was going to. I mean, nobody has been more a supporter of this project than myself, and I remain supportive of senior housing. By the same token, there are other people in town who look at a vacant building now going on 5 years, I guess. And when we first entered into an agreement with you, we said we would definitely guarantee 2 years and leave it open for 3, which we did, and we've extended it. I feel that I'm in a strange position because I feel like now here we are all these years later, and I don't know that we're any closer to this project than we are at the beginning. You may have a different feeling. I'm just saying it from my perspective. Now with the advent of the new building, the new school being built, now we're going to be looking at other buildings, and we have to address these. Because at the end, if a year or 2 passes and nothing happens there, we're going to be left with a 6 or 7 year-old vacant building, 7 years vacant building, that is going to face probably more substantial things than anybody expected. And from a financial standpoint, I think we have to, at least one member of the board, have to start looking at what our alternatives are. I don't want to discourage, but I think Mr. Ebersol is right, and I think you would even agree that we're talking about, the earliest you're saying is 2015. But I think that's probably even optimistic. So I don't know where we go from here. I'm caught in a weird scenario. I certainly want to see it go forward. I'd like to be able to stay the course, but I don't know that there's an ending to the course. I don't know that if we wait long enough, it'll be senior housing, and that's the thing that concerns me the most.
Well, a couple of comments. I think the environment that we're in, that we started to see 3 or 4 years ago with affordable housing development across the country and in Massachusetts, has been incredibly frustrating to anyone who's in the business of developing, being a sponsor, being a community, being a funder, that more of this type of housing hasn't been able to get done. It is certainly incredibly frustrating for myself and RCAP Solutions, who have made it a priority area to develop housing for low-income families and individuals. So, I mean, I think it was the perfect storm when we first met with you. The HUD 202 program was well-funded. We all knew, anyone in the business, it would take this long to develop senior housing, and that got completely flipped over on its head. The Qualified Action Plan for the state of Massachusetts does not prioritize senior housing any longer. The resources, despite the governor's interest in developing 10,000 units a year for 4 years, is certainly heroic, but the fact remains that the funding to actually do that has not developed. So incredibly frustrating error for anyone who is trying to do affordable housing who doesn't have private money in the deal, which we do not. The concessions that the town we've spoken about are greatly appreciated because you just can't do anything these days without those types of concessions. I have spoken on several occasions about the pilot. We have 9 senior housing projects throughout central Massachusetts, and we have a pilot for every one of them. So, you know, I understand the local politics that are operating, but I don't quite understand why it can't be done in Lunenburg when it's done in 9 other communities in central Massachusetts. So that for me is still an issue that hasn't, I've not been able to resolve. So again, very frustrating for all of us, but I don't know that there's any easy answer to any of the questions. The funding is not guaranteed. We can do the best that we can to approach potential funders, but at the end of the day, it's a one-stop application that goes to the state. They prioritize the type of housing and their commitment to do senior housing. So that's where we're at, unfortunately, but that's the environment that we're in as we stand here today.
And I think you also have to realize that the state it's being dumped back onto the state. That basically the federal government, as we all see, is downsizing, and they're picking areas in which to downsize. And I think it's regrettable because one of the greatest growing populations is our senior population. And the fact is that there is nothing in the future that the federal government has in the pipeline that's going to say that they're going to change what they're currently, their current philosophy is in regards to funding this kind of housing. So it does leave it up to the state, and I'll give a lot of credit to DHCD and to all the different housing actors and lenders that basically they are grappling with this, and they've come up with a plan, much more complex, I grant you, much more intensified in terms of the effort, but they want to create long-term senior affordable housing. And this is the opportunity to use that opportunity of the bond bill and the state low-income housing tax credits to try to make this work. So I appreciate your concerns, but we haven't given up, and that's one thing that our commitment, RCAP and J and Jewell Associates, is why we're standing here and offering this opportunity, is because we haven't given up, and we're going to work to the end in terms of getting this, financed, if we can get it financed through the state with these different programs.
Yeah, I don't want I do want to reflect on what I said. I don't want it to be a reflection on either of you. I know that you have tried incredibly hard, and I want to continue to do it. And if it wasn't for your efforts, we would have obviously abandoned this long ago. So we do acknowledge that, and do not in any way, I don't in any way, perceive that we are in the position because of lack of effort or lack of ability on your parts. I know that the perfect storm that you talked about is 100% true, and it's regrettable, to use your words, and I would use them as well, that in a country that says that we prize seniors, and just like we do veterans, that we do very little to help them when it's needed. So
I want to echo that. I'm not finding fault with either of you. I am just concerned about the financial responsibility to all of the citizens of Lunenburg. And the longer we leave that building vacant, I'm very concerned about the potential cost to rehab it or the viability of it to sell it to someone else should this project not go forward. I want to go back to the concessions, however, because you thanked us for concessions, but I'm not aware that we've given any. We talked on the periphery about things that you might be looking for, and that's one of the things that I keep going back to, because I want to know, what is the tax revenue from this project? What are you looking for specifically for concessions? I want to get feedback from the sewer commission, for example, on what that cost is going to be, where the costs are going to come from. But before I can give support to continue this, I need to know specifically what concessions are you looking for, what matching funds are you looking for from the town. And without that, I don't think we can move forward, because I don't think we have everything in line as to what the potential revenue is from the project and what the costs are for the project. I understand the timeline you can't forecast, as the chairman pointed out, we're basically starting again. And I understand that you're going to do the best you can and submit the best application that you can. But I really need to know hard and fast, what are you looking for from the town? And without that, I can't make a recommendation to keep going.
And the reality is that we're going to know that before they submit the application, because in order to submit the application, they have to have all the numbers in place, which includes ours, and they're going to ask us for a letter of support. So the question is, when do you think you'll be actually submitting the application, which then, if you back that up, when will you be coming back to us for what you're going to ask?
I think by this spring, later this spring, we'll have all the answers that we need from the different lenders in regards to what all the cost implications are in terms of all this different financing and how this ultimately works. I've actually run a number of scenarios, financial scenarios, and I keep on inputting in regards to that. So I can get you that. I mean, at the base minimum is that the building has to be at no cost to donated to the project. Beyond that, it will not be full valued for taxes, because it cannot support that. I already know that based on all the, just preliminary scenarios that I've run. And so I will finalize that, and I'll give that to Carrie, and she can share that information with you once I've met with all the different lenders to make sure that I haven't missed anything.
And the other suggestion, just to follow up on Mrs. Bertram's comment too, is that if you get in touch with our regional assessor, Harold Schride, and actually have the conversation now about the legality and what's the comment, maybe the project has changed enough in a way that therefore it would be qualified. But he's a respected assessor and wouldn't say this unless he had a specific concern. And I think the sooner you find that out now than later, then we can find out what that has to be dealt with.
More than happy to meet with him, because actually this is a critical component, and you bring up a very critical issue in terms of the overall financial health and viability of this project and its feasibility. I mean, whenever you look at these projects, Paul is absolutely right. In all the projects I have done, whether they call it a pilot or they've had another structure that they've given, it's with the idea that the long-term benefit and that is achieved by the town in terms of this being long-term affordable senior housing, and we're talking, into perpetuity. So the bottom line here is that benefit gets, weighed against the immediate tax benefits and other benefits that the town might have. It's a trade-off, and I have done 12 202 and senior housing projects myself over the years. And those trade-offs have, in my opinion, been well worth it, but that's for you to ultimately make the decision on.
And then certainly the whole concept of the local preference for local seniors and the lottery process, we would want to know about that, because we did just sell a school project, and part of the concern were a lot of the seniors and how they were going to pay for it, and if we can keep the seniors in town, and because we've always dealt with that with the local housing authority and other things like that. So,
and we have clearly, Paul and I have agreed that the maximum allowed by the state in regards to the documents themselves is a 70% local preference, and we're going to be applying for that. That's been previously approved on other senior housing projects and other projects, and we would work with the housing authority and the town to work a model that therefore would not only achieve that, but hopefully exceed that. But the goal that can be established and can be approved through the state is the 70%, and that's what we'd be seeking.
Okay, thank you.
So at some point, we're going to see a proposal. It's going to outline what do you expect from us. It's going to outline any concessions. It's going to tell us what you're carrying as a value for that building. Because if now the state is expecting the town to be kicking in, there's got to be a value placed on that building and that land.
Well, we talked to the assessors, it's whatever the assessed value of the building is, but that's what we would contribute, and that actually has a line item in the.
The assessed value of the building is, it's a made-up number. It's meaningless. It's, the assessors, a town-owned property, put a number on it that balances. It's not necessarily a
understand.
value. I mean, it's,
But what ends up happening is that the state would, in deals similar to this, would come out and do their own appraisal at the.
they will.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but
So-
they'll recognize the value of what will be achieved from the town.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that in the recent deal that I had, it actually did come out pretty close to what the assessors had placed a value on the property.
Okay.
It was another school.
And where are we at with the current agreement? Does it or did it expire?
It did expire.
Expired.
Yeah, it did expire.
It did expire, okay. So we're not in a position to extend until we know what we're getting into.
That's right. And that's our risk. We're taking the time and effort to try to make this, to make this work and show you that it will work. And at that point, we hope that that would be extended to give us sufficient time to get the financing necessary.
And you said spring. Do you have any, can you pinpoint it? a little bit closer than that?
Well, no, I can't, because basically I have to
Red
go
Sox
through
opening season?
I will shoot
Truck
for
day.
it doesn't serve Paul or I any benefit to delay this any longer than it has to be. The key here is the process in which the different lenders going, and evaluating the project in detail will come back and give us the feedback we want.
The reason I'm asking is because, and the town manager can chime in because I'm not sure of the regulations, but I believe that if we were to want to put this property back out to market, that we would have to have permission from town meeting to do so. Is that true?
My recollection is that the building was turned over to this board for disposition.
Okay, so it would not require another town meeting
No.
vote? Okay. What I was getting at is our town meeting is in May, and if you come back with concessions that that we can't agree with, then I want to have the opportunity to put it back out. So I wanted to make sure there wasn't going to be a timeline issue, but it doesn't sound like there will be.
Okay?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make a point relative to the Building Reuse Committee. This particular property, because it has been part of this project, was not part of our review.
Right.
But certainly, I think that the board and the town needs to weigh the objectives of senior housing along with the objectives of underutilized buildings as we kind of put a big plan together. And it's been our intention from the beginning for that big plan to be as comprehensive as possible as opposed to unit by unit. So we have not done that yet, but we're certainly willing to do that when the time is appropriate, and even if it includes an understanding of what the best proposal for senior housing is, maybe even including a different of our properties, not to start the process over again, but it's a possibility.
Sure. Well, again, I appreciate you both for coming again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for keeping at it, nose to the grindstone, and, who knows? I'd like to see it happen. I know you guys would like to see it happen.
Well, we appreciate it, and the fact is that we feel, based on the recent conversations, I feel more than that this is really going to happen, finally. So I appreciate your patience and support.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, open the warrant for the annual town meeting and review the schedule for the annual town meeting.
There is a schedule included in your agenda packet, which would begin with the opening of the warrant this evening. According to our bylaw, the warrant, if it is open this evening, it would stay open until 4 p.m. on Monday, March 24th. We have a requirement that the warrant stay open 42 days prior to the annual town meeting. Other activities in preparation for annual town meeting include distribution of the town manager's budget recommendation on February 18th, a presentation of that recommendation on Thursday, February 27th. That is a regularly scheduled Finance Committee meeting. During the 4 Thursdays in the month of March, the Finance Committee reviews all of the budget requests, and there is a supplemental schedule which shows what departments the Finance Committee will be reviewing on each of those evenings. The town caucus will occur either on Monday, March 10 or Monday, March 17th. I believe we're still in the process of getting that scheduled. I mentioned closing the warrant on March 24th. I am proposing that this board have a special meeting on Tuesday, March 25th to order the warrant and make recommendations. The Finance Committee will hold its public hearing on Thursday, March 27. At that same meeting, they will take all of their final votes on warrant articles and submit their report to the Selectmen's office on Monday, March 31st. Then the following Tuesday, April 1st, this board would make its final votes, anything that would appear in the warrant at that meeting, and then we send the warrant to the printer, mailed to residents on Thursday, April 17th. We have our standard meetings to prepare and review motions, a meeting with the moderator. Then we have the annual town meeting on Saturday, May 3rd, and the annual election on Tuesday, May 17th.
Tuesday, Saturday.
So, I'm sorry, Saturday. Somewhere I changed that. Somewhere, somehow, but not here.
Any questions about the schedule? I would entertain a motion that we open the town meeting, the annual town meeting warrant.
I would make a motion to open the warrant for annual town meeting on February 4th and to close the town meeting warrant at 4 p.m. on March 24th.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None.
So again, the Finance Committee budget hearing schedule is included in the packet. These meetings are all scheduled. These appointments are all scheduled. The meetings will be televised. And you certainly are welcome to attend any of those hearings.
As is the public.
As is the public, I didn't mean to.
Okay, minutes.
Why don't you take these out? The folder didn't come out, apparently.
Okay, so warrants, we have an accounts payable warrant in the amount of $432,836.13. And another accounts payable in the amount of $1,155.09. Payroll deduction warrant in the amount of $532,341.60. And a payroll warrant in the amount of $627,320.08. Bills?
Yeah, third quarter warrant.
Okay, the third quarter water department bills to go out. Okay. Given the immediacy of technology, I've just been notified that the school committee has canceled their meeting tomorrow night. It's like a news anchor at some point. Oh, wait.
Breaking news.
Exactly. What is this from? Oh, I haven't read these. This is the long one. Those are minutes. Any action file issues from anyone?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Ebersol.
Mrs. Bertram will speak on the planning board, but one of the items that they talked about recently was their information technology platform by which they share plans among themselves. For a developer is required to submit a file electronically, and it gets uploaded to that file, and all the members can do there. But one of the things that was talked about at that meeting was the concept of expanding that to other boards and commissions. I'm not asking for action right now, but they can just sort of go into the discussion that we've already talked about for upgrading our website, sharing information among departments, looking at the communication possibility of that. One of the items that came up was, as a result of Mrs. Bertram being there, was that there's a development that includes a possible gravel removal. And if we had access to the plans, we may have seen that sooner than later. So I would just suggest, I've shared this with the town manager, she suggested I bring it up at this point, that we add this to the concept of how we do our sharing of information in the town.
Yeah, let me just, it was under my update, but I'll jump to it. During the meeting, there was a proposal, this is the development on Elmwood Road, and it's 6 residential homes, and it's going to require the removal of 50,000 cubic yards of gravel. And removing that that amount of material obviously is going to trigger an earth removal permit. And had myself or Mr. Ebersol not been at the meeting, that may not have been picked up, because this earth is going to be removed prior to the issuance of building permits. So there would not be a permit other than the planning board approval that would have been, that would, you know, should the planning board approve this plan, that would have been endorsed, and then that project would have gone forward, and it wouldn't have been picked up on until later, you know, during that process of removing the earth. And so during the meeting, I mentioned that this is going to require an earth removal permit from the Board of Selectmen. And the question that was asked by the chair is, the planning board would have been aware of that fact. You guys will recall that an earth removal permit was issued for the construction of a single-family home. It was just on one lot, and they were moving enough earth that they needed an earth removal permit. But the way that was triggered is during the building permit issuance, is the building inspector, who's also the zoning officer, picked up on it, that it would require an earth removal permit. But for a subdivision plan, it may have already gone through that process and been endorsed, and that removal could have started without us being aware of it. So a discussion took place about how do we make other land use boards aware of what's going on. And it's easy to talk about a plan, but unless you can look at the plan, it's not as easy to pick up on different things that may be triggered. So what was talked about at the meeting is they're currently sharing plans, and the technology department has set that up for each member to be able to go to a site and look at the plan. And what we talked about is the possibility of allowing that for other land use boards. And the planning director noted that at one point the Board of Selectmen used to get the plans, and they stopped that because, frankly, you know, there's only storage space for so much stuff, and we're talking huge sets of plans. But if we can, rather than circulating them just to the people that work in the building, but to make them available to the elected officials that may not have an opportunity to see the plan until they come to the meeting, but if it were available online, they could look at the plan, such as Conservation. The Conservation Commission, Sharon Jordan was there as well, and she agreed. She said that as a Conservation Commission member, she doesn't see the plans until she comes to the meeting that night. If she had an opportunity to review the plans prior to coming to the meeting, she would be able to ask, you know, pertinent questions, because she would have been familiar with the project prior to getting there, rather than sharing one set of plans across all of the commission members. So if we can make that happen through the technology that we have available, I think it would behoove everybody to do that.
And my understanding of the way the system works is that once it's uploaded by the developer, an email goes out to somebody or some people that it is there and people can then go to it, so it's not sent out to everybody, it stays in one place. So it's just a matter of adding more people to that list and who those people should be.
Right, exactly.
I did just want to make a comment about the earth removal permit. I have to strongly advocate for the land use departments are going to have to make the selectmen aware when that issue comes up. That's your office, with all of the resources the town has for land use departments. That's where our expertise is on these matters. I'm not going to be able to pick that up. You're not, I just can't accept responsibility for us trying to.
And I'm not trying to, but unfortunately, the planning director wasn't aware of that either. And, you know, so when I was listening to the amount of trucks that we were talking about, which was incredible to me, I think we were talking about, it was a ridiculous number of trucks that are going to be going back and forth. 50,000 cubic yards of it's 80 to 100 truck trips a day for 2 months. On a very small residential road. So it's a total of 4,000 truck trips we're talking about.
I mean, it just...
It's because they rely on the zoning officer to, at the time of building permit, that's usually when things are triggered.
Mm-hmm.
This is a hole that we discovered that
Right.
needs to be moved back into the land use. As you said, the land use department should be doing it, and this sort of showed that this is an issue that you just can't rely on the existing system.
Well, except for the tech review meetings that occur where all of the land use departments and public safety, if required, and DPW, if required, participate in. I mean, they're just, it sounds like something happened
I think there was a checklist that
Well,
may have
and
been
I-
missed.
Talking about public safety, and I guess I have a concern about the tech meetings and how they're happening, because during the discussion of this particular development, another discussion came up, and that was relative to the storm scepters associated with this project. During another development, and this was on Whalum Road, there were significant stormwater structures that are being talked about that are going to require a great deal of maintenance and expense on the part of the town. And I actually, after attending the meeting, actually had an opportunity to speak with the DPW director and said, are you aware of the maintenance required with these? And frankly, he wasn't. And he did look at the manuals and looked at them, and then attended the hearing subsequently and voiced the concern that these stormwater systems are needed to be retained by the developer, because the town simply doesn't have the manpower to maintain these. Well, a similar discussion occurred on Monday night, and it is the fact that there are 2 oversized stormwater scepters that this development is proposing, and they're going to require vacuuming, stormwater vac trucks, at least 4 times a year for these storm scepters. So my concern is, and I actually mentioned this at the planning board meeting, and Mr. Allison, as a planning board member, did mention that at the last large development that came before the planning board, the DPW director expressed concerns about the ability of the town to continue to maintain such significant structures.
Mm-hmm.
This particular development, again, is going to need a lot of maintenance on the part of the town because of the drainage associated with the development. And given the fact that the DPW is already understaffed and underfunded, do we have the ability to maintain these type of structures? And should, in fact, the planning board be looking at some sort of bond or some sort of funding mechanism for these type of structures? So I do think there's a disconnect, and I don't know whether it's the tech meetings, I don't know whether it's the information that's presented at the tech meetings, but I have a concern, because I think that there are things that we should be looking at more thoroughly that are being missed.
Okay, so I think that we started out as one targeted thing, and it's kind of, if you take a picture of those electron microscope of all these quarks that spun out of control, there's like 6 things that came up in there. Okay, so let's
I
just
didn't like any of them.
let's just touch on some of them. So technology-wise,
Well,
can we, meaning the town, not the Board of Selectmen, can the town establish policies that require developers to submit their proposals in a specific format, PDF or whatever other kind of geological one that is shareable? I think the answer is yes. That should be adopted
Yes,
by
it
the
is.
planning board. And as far as as housing that technology and make it available on the website, we would look to our IT director, but certainly all the technology, even in everybody's household, is available to do that. So we should take steps to do that as far as sharing.
They are doing that now.
Right.
Already.
Well, and that we could certainly put one in that when the submission comes in, it automatically triggers an email to everybody who's an elected official, that we need to. That's fine. Of greater concern, because I think if I look at the bird's eye view of this, I think we have questions, many members have questions, including the town manager, about, okay, who's getting notified when in the whole planning process? And I agree with the town manager. I think it's great that we talked about this in the context of sharing documents, but if we think that we're going to share documents and the Board of Selectmen is going to look at this and say, hey, that's going to trigger an earth removal permit, I think that's really far-fetched, and that's not really where the responsibility lies. I think what we need to do is discuss with the land review boards and the tech meetings, saying, listen, this is a checklist for every single proposal that comes to you. There should be a checklist. Does this require earth removal? It's a check mark. Either it does or it doesn't. If it doesn't, then you just go by and you say no, and nothing else gets done. But if it says yes, does it include stormwater management and systems that need to be maintained? I mean, this is just a checklist of who, depending on which one you check, who gets notified.
And that was talked about, and I think that's exactly what we're talking about, Tom, is creating, there's a checklist right now to get sign-offs from different departments, but creating a checklist that answers those questions for the development that comes in, so that each appropriate entity is aware that, that they're going to have. And the possibility of having a meeting with the chairs of the land use boards to flush this out was talked about.
Well, we've talked about having co-meetings with other boards. I think that we should look in the near future to look for the planning board and meet them, because I think these are, we can't have these be missed, and we can't have these be last minute things. Oh, they have an approved plan, and meanwhile, why are 80 to 100 trucks going in, and they don't even have permit? That would be something you'd want to know at the beginning, and it's certainly knowable at the beginning.
Right, and the cost associated with stormwater management and trying to flush that out, and so I think that makes sense. And I think having a meeting to talk about these type of things makes sense.
I think so too. So if we can try, in the next couple of months. I mean, doesn't be.
We certainly can. As anybody who served as chair of this board knows, that's not the easiest meeting to schedule. And I'm sitting here trying to decide whether or not I should say something, and I'm just going to. I think we're at the point where we need a senior staff person in land use, because I think what is happening is, coordination is great when it's getting coordinated, but we've had a number of issues lately, and I don't want to get into it because, some of them involve a lawsuit that we've been working on, where it really was town council who said, okay, Carrie, it's time for you to pull these people together because everybody's working at odds. And I just think that we're big enough and we do enough work that somebody has to take the primary responsibility. The checklists are great, but what happens if somebody's not working on the checklist? And frankly, you could say that's something that the town manager should do, but I'm also the planning director and the human resources director and these other things. So that's my expertise. That's where I work. We need a more senior staff person in land use, not to supersede what other boards and committees are doing, but to coordinate and make sure that we're not losing.
I would have to.
Well, I agree with that, and I think that we would want to, we would want to meet with the planning board and at least discuss how things go and what our concerns are if things are getting missed and getting caught well down the road after they should be.
And I think it goes beyond the planning board. I think when we talk about things like stormwater maintenance, I think that the DPW, looking at a plan but not understanding that, he wasn't at the planning board hearing where they talked about the fact that they're going to need to vac these stormwater scepters 4 times a year. Looking at a plan and seeing a stormwater system is very different than hearing the discussion that the town is going to have to go out with vac trucks 4 times a year. So I think identifying that for the DPW director, because, you look at a plan, that doesn't jump out at you. So I think the knowledge transfer
Right.
is what's critical. And I think understanding from the other land use boards, specifically the DPW, what information they need versus just getting the plan, because that information isn't necessarily in the plan.
The other thing that goes on is that the developer didn't know about it. Now, the developer is charged with knowing things of what's going on, but if we're trying to help business, or, if this was, a commercial enterprise that was going to end up doing this, we would want them to have the information up front. So the coordination works at the end, but it also coordination then says out to the people, and I bring it back to the technology, on the website, make sure you have your checklist of all the following things. So it works together. So, I would assume that there may be something showing up in the process of the budget for how we're going to try to, do that, or it may be an organizational discussion that we'll have at some point in the short term. So it wouldn't just be the planning board, it really needs to be like a
Town as a
development committee. We've talked about economic development and other
Economic
things like that.
development.
It's sort of, we may need to do a brainstorm before we do an invitation to figure out who we need to have at that point. So, I'd be willing to work with Paula to come up with who should be at the table at that point for that meeting, and then get that to Carrie to try to organize.
I think that's a good point. I think it's a process issue, but it's also a way to stimulate economic development. Because I think that if we can identify as a community the checklist that Bob's talking about, that is, for both commercial and residential. We've talked a lot about the need to increase our economic, our commercial and industrial revenue. And the way we're going to do that is to entice people to come. So I think it does tie somewhat to the possibility of an economic development team, which we have talked about before as a board. But identifying, what different triggers are set off and what information needs to be relayed to various departments, I think would make it easier for the developer and for all of the land use boards.
Mr.
I
Matthews?
think we just want to, that's all sounds great, but I think we need to scale this back real quick because it's getting really big. It's simply a process issue. And we've had so many instances in the past where something doesn't get flushed out as an issue until it's at the building inspector's office. Because everyone does their little piece, or their big piece. It gets to him and it's like, oh, wait a minute. This doesn't fit, this doesn't work, you can't do that. And all of a sudden, someone's got their whole plan in place and they spent a boatload of money, whether it's a developer or an individual. It's like, oh, you got to go back to square one and start over. So obviously, we're coming at this in the wrong direction. So if we get the direction right, and maybe it funnels through, and you guys have to figure that out, or, planning boards will figure that out, or land use boards, I should say, and the building inspector. Let's get it identified up front. Tell you all the hoops you got to go through. Lay them out, which is pretty much what we're saying, but, let's start that scale, and then everything else follows, because you're right. If it's easy to do business in town, if it's easy to come in and develop, and if it's easy to establish a business, then sure, you want to come here. If you have a reputation for being a challenge, no one's going to want to come, and they're going to think twice about it. So,
And I think if we can facilitate that, I agree with you. I think it's 2 different phases. I think the first is the process issue, and we've got to identify that. And then the second is, the potential for streamlining the process to stimulate economic development. So I agree with you that it's 2-pronged, but I, how that's facilitated. And I agree with the town manager that, and this is something I wasn't keen on when we first talked about it, but now having been involved and seen, from various perspectives, from conservation, from planning, from different sewer, different land use departments, that there is a need to coordinate all of that. But I agree with Mr. Matthews that first we've got to define the process. So if we can facilitate that happening, I think that's our role, is to facilitate.
Okay, we will.
One more item on action item.
Yes.
I was able to go to the Mass Municipal Association meeting and went to the broadband booth. This was somewhat follows up on my report from the library. Apparently, there are about 15 providers who are going to be able to utilize the broadband line and give the service, and that it's up to each community to pick which firm to use. And the question becomes, what process would we want to come up with? And I would suggest we put it on the next week's agenda or some future agenda item for the process by which we would recommend that our buildings be that, as opposed to each one going out on their own. And whenever that goes live, that we want to be ahead of that game. So I just was bringing that up to say we should put that on the agenda.
Sure. Well, we can, I've submitted and sent information to the IT director in town, and I know he has met with Mass Broadband, I believe, in this past summer, late last summer. So he is aware of the process. I agree that we don't want departments doing this. We want to do this townwide, and I don't think there's any indication that departments would do this alone. I mean, I think they're all looking to the IT director to do it. And I have full confidence in Mr. Malandrinos that he can assess the criteria and engage with them. Some of them only are going to cover certain portions of those 15, only going to cover certain portions of the state anyway. So it's not like he has to run through 15 different applications or phone calls. He just has to find out who's servicing this area and who we can choose. But I think we can have the further discussion, sure. And maybe we should invite him, the IT director, if he wants to be here in case some of us have questions.
We certainly can do that. I did have a preliminary discussion with him today about this, and he has met with a number of the vendors because they have been in touch with him for months and months and months in anticipation of this project. And what he relayed to me is he has yet to come across any package from any vendor that is more cost-effective than what we currently have. He said he did feel that as this gets up and running, that their pricing maybe will get better, but right now their pricing, what he's seen, is not better than what we have, which was kind of a disappointment, because I expected that.
And what we have now is Comcast? Is that what we're talking?
Comcast, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think part of the major difference is scalability, probably, is that, Comcast has a certain infrastructure, and I don't know what their ceiling is, but certainly when they built the fiber project that is now completed, it has a very, very high ceiling. There's a lot of capacity built into that. So if we look, I know one of the things that's been talked about in the past is going to, internet telephony, and that, would be one thing that would be really good to investigate further down the road. I don't know when it'll happen, but it makes sense to happen, and we just want to make sure we have the bandwidth. Again, I have the fullest confidence in Mr. Malandrino's skill level, so I trust his analysis. Okay, that was a very feisty action files.
Sorry
discussion.
about that.
Committee reports, Board of Health.
No report.
Building reuse.
No report.
Capital Planning Committee.
Mr. Chairman, before you go, the Building Reuse Committee, the charge that we had for them, I don't want to get rid of them because of all the great work they did, but did that charge end when we came up with the plan? I know that some of the people wanted to get off. I just didn't know what our plan was for the Building Reuse Committee.
Never leave.
Well, this actually came up at the planning board meeting, and I was going to bring it up under my update, is one of the Building Reuse Committee members is on the planning board, and he asked, what is the charge moving forward? And, I said we'd get back to him. So I think that's what Bob is bringing in.
I think if we put that on an agenda as far as do we reconfigure the Building Reuse Committee?
Well, sure, we can have a further discussion.
Well,
Sure.
because we may need, we're talking about now TCP and what happens with that, and whether that's a different committee or whether that's something we're going to charge with the Building Reuse Committee, or how we're going to.
Mr. Chairman, I guess my thought on the process was that I understood that the school building the school committee went on record to say that if the school project was approved, they were planning to recommend turning over the excess property, TCP and Brooks, to the town. I assume that would trigger our discussion of, okay, now what do we do with all of the properties? And then I would I would sponsor a discussion among us on what are the skill sets required. They may not be exactly the same as what we had on the Building Reuse Committee.
And since that turning it over is not going to happen for probably 2 years, we would want to plan before the 2 years. The question is do we disband the school, the building reuse committee now, and at the appropriate time as we get closer, reconstitute.
Maybe I wasn't clear enough. I think what I was talking about is turn the ownership over. What we wouldn't want to do is dispose of the property within 2 years, but we may want to do some things in terms of planning and RFPs and several other.
Yeah, I think we want to be,
Yeah,
we want to be
exactly.
ready. We
Well, I
want-
think
we
that's
don't
what
want to do
Mr.
that
Ingersoll
after.
said.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right.
we don't want to do
It's just
that after.
none of that's going to happen.
Tomorrow.
And that's not in the current charge of the committee.
Right.
And so I'm trying to keep the committee current, is that, maybe we could ask Mr. Toll to look at the committee and see who is interested in continuing to serve, or do we just disband it now and then create a new committee for, specific buildings?
Well, I think that my approach would be not, do we keep it because there's enough people who want to stay around on it? I would say, what is the purpose, and has the purpose been fulfilled, and is the use of the buildings down the line, is it a different purpose of that committee, or is it the same? And those criteria, I think, would say whether we leave it or not.
Right, so I think
for
we've
me.
got to relook at what the
Right,
charter
so let's have
was,
the
yeah.
discussion, and we can put it on, we can have, you're not here next week, correct?
Not here.
So we can have that discussion next week, because it's
Yeah, and I won't be
board
either.
member,
Good.
unless you have particular feelings one way or another about the building reuse committee that you'd like to be here for.
Well, that's a kind of a trick question, of course, I do.
No,
However,
I'm saying,
That's a no question.
That's a good discussion to have next week.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was a roundabout way of saying that, thank you.
Awesome dismount.
Now if we could just get out of the meeting.
Finance committee.
Nothing substantial to report. As you saw, they've worked out their schedule through town meeting, and will begin the process of meeting with department heads and budget reviews, et cetera.
Okay, library board of trustees,
No further reports since last time.
MPO.
There is a meeting next week, which I unfortunately will not be able to attend, but I will give an update to Brad Harris of MRPC on where we are with Chase Road. It has been submitted. We haven't heard anything from DOT, but I'll make sure they're aware of the project.
Okay, planning board.
A lot of what the planning board talked about on the 27th has already gone over, so I'll just go over briefly. Chief Marino was there and provided some information and some recommendations regarding marijuana clinics. He voiced some security issues, things that he would want to see, lighting, video surveillance, distance from where kids congregate in schools, etc. But he provided some feedback to the planning board, and the planning board is working on that bylaw. Stone Farm was on the agenda because they're looking to switch from a quad to a triplex, but that was tabled. Highfield Village, they do have a sewer allocation agreement in place, and the Sewer Commission was looking at the plans last week. I'm not sure what the status of that was. The EIR has been reviewed by MIPA, and there are 2 wetlands crossings that they want some additional detail on. So bottom line is the planning board extended it again until April 30th, but there is movement on the project, and it does look like it's going to go forward. They're hoping to submit the final subdivision plan by February 24th, and then hopefully finalize the approval in April. Elmwood Road, as we talked about the 6 residences and the earth removal issues. They are looking at the possibility of this land abuts Proctor Park, which is a 25-acre parcel under the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. And Sharon Jordan attended from the Conservation Commission, and there was talk about the possibility of a 10-foot strip or easement. Currently, there's a drainage easement proposed on the property, and there's possibility of entertaining a conservation easement to allow people access to Proctor Park. The roadway exceeds the length of roadway, so they'd be looking for a waiver for that. So that was discussed. They did table the review of the plan continued the review of the plan until the next meeting. Bob touched on the building reuse. The school, they did talk about the fact that the school building will require a site plan review. And Dave, I don't know if the school building committee is aware of that.
Well, there's a planning board member on it, so.
Okay. He mentioned that was discussed, so I just want to make sure that we start that process, because it will require a site plan review. Whitetail Crossing is a development that had hoped to have road accepted last May, and as we all know, that didn't happen, so they're hoping to get that on the warrant for this May. And I wasn't there for the first hearing, Bob, and I think that you were. I don't know if there was anything to share on Force Corp of 305 Leominster Shirley Road.
They were talking about a lot of the pavement and alignment of the roads and sight lines. Conservation weighed in. I believe they addressed all the issues that they had. They changed the plans at various points. The peer reviewer was there, and he was fine with what they were doing. I don't know if they actually voted to approve it or not. I think they did.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. PAC.
The PAC is going through some quorum, open meeting law minutes issues, leadership issues that will be coming before us at a later meeting.
Okay, and we should make sure that on the warrant, we have a placeholder for the PAC bylaw revisions, of which this board should discuss with the remaining members of PAC.
Oh, yeah.
School Advisory Committee on Acceptance and Diversity.
We had our initial meeting and a second meeting, including some strategic planning. We're going to be working with Fitchburg State University at no charge, the Departments of Communication, Cultural Studies, and Political Science, through the use of their graduate students, faculty, and researchers. Will be able to do a short-term process of doing research with us, doing surveys, doing scorecards. This committee will end at the end of this school year, so it is a time-based process. We're meeting about twice a month.
Excellent, thank you. School Committee.
They're not meeting tomorrow night, I hear.
You've heard it here. School Building Committee.
No updates.
Sewer Commission.
Two major items following up on Mrs. Bertram's comment about Highfield Village, which is the development behind Walmart and Hannaford's. They are almost done with the sewer plan. It's had peer review. They have some minor changes. They're going to bring the final plan back to the commission on February 11th, which will be in time before the planning board meeting, because it's sort of the chicken and the egg. Each needs each other's approvals to do that. But they have got everything done. That plan will bring sewer down Maple Parkway onto White Street out to Mass Ave, and will provide sewer to that area of need that was on the original comprehensive plan, as well as and that will be paid for. The pipe itself and the installation will be paid for by the developer.
Excellent.
The second thing is they've come up with, again, another balanced budget. Sewer Commission.
And Mass Broadband, we just discussed. Town Manager reports.
I just have one report. I wanted to present to you the second quarter financial reports. Both the town accountant and I put together a summary memo. My memo, I just made a couple of additional comments on what the town accountant had included. The town accountant did present this to the Finance Committee at their last meeting. Basically, we are in very good shape ending the second quarter. There really hasn't been anything that has come to light that didn't come to light in the first quarter. In terms of revenues, we're doing very well on our local receipts, still collecting a little bit higher than we expected in meals tax. Also doing much better than we expected in fines. And those fines mostly are motor vehicle stops. And so we have asked the police chief for some additional information, because this is kind of an anomaly for us. Building permits or licenses and permits were doing better than expected. That has everything to do with the fact that the building permits for the 2 solar projects were issued within the second quarter. We're doing fine with our taxes and state aid. In terms of expenditures, we still have a projected overage, or we do have an overage in our police fire injury leave as a result of a long-term disability which has been converted to a retirement, so we will have to make that up there. In radio watch dispatch, we did have some discussion about this at the Finance Committee meeting, and I did provide some additional clarification. What the town accountant did when she put together the report is she basically assumes that if we continue spending at the same level that we're spending, we're going to have problems in certain areas. While that is true, we don't always continue spending at the same spending level, because if we did, we'd always overspend our budget. So one of the items that she did mention was if we continue spending at the same rate and continue charging where we're charging for our lobby coverage at the Public Safety Building, we would have a problem. What I wanted to point out is that when I put the budget together originally, I assumed or based the budget on the assumption that we would have lobby coverage Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., and that we would use a mix of uniform personnel and non-uniform personnel. Shortly after the budget was prepared, the chief came to me and said, you know, if I had uniform personnel in that position, there are many times where that uniformed officer could also perform lockup monitoring. That comes out of a separate budget. So part of the reason it looks like we have an overage in the dispatch line, and that's where we're charging this lobby coverage, is because we're charging that if somebody's working and as part of their shift they're doing dispatch monitoring, it's not necessarily getting charged right there. So I don't anticipate that we will have a problem. It may be that as we get closer toward the end of the fiscal year, we may have to shorten up those hours. And the police chief has put in a request for additional funding in fiscal 15. I don't expect that we are going to overrun that budget as a result of that lobby coverage, but for anybody who's followed our expenses year after year, probably about every other year we have a fairly significant overage in lockup. So that it's not uncommon for that to happen, but that's something that we will manage within the budget. We do have an overage in snow removal, and deficit spending has been authorized by the Finance Committee. We do have a projected overage in veterans benefits. We do have a number, I believe we have 6 veterans that are receiving benefits, and we would expect if they continue with that same level of benefit, which we have every reason to believe will occur based on the information we have from the veterans agent, that we will have a potential or a deficit at the end of the year of $42,000. We have seen over the last couple of years a significant increase in the benefits that are paid out. For veterans, a lot of times what we see is veterans qualify for benefits, but they go through a process through the VA, and sometimes that's a lengthy process, and sometimes while they're going through that process, they qualify for local benefits as a stopgap measure. Sometimes they qualify for local benefits and they're not going to get federal benefits, but 75% of the benefits that we pay out are returned back to us by the state in the following fiscal year.
Bless you.
I did a survey last year when I noticed we were paying out significantly more than we had in previous years, and found that we've just been lucky that communities in this area are paying significant amounts in veterans benefits. I talked to Townsend and Pepperell and Lancaster and I'm not sure which other communities, but they were paying upwards of, Groton was one, close to $100,000 on an annual basis in veterans benefits. So this is something that we probably need to be budgeting more for. We will have a surplus in our workers' comp and liability insurances. We know that because we pay those premiums on July 1st, and we also during the year accumulate credits for different activities that we undertake, so that's why we have a surplus there. We do have a fairly significant surplus projected in health insurance. We're looking at, the town accountant mentioned $50,000, I think I was being a little more conservative. But we have two things happening. We have a reduction in the number of employees that are covered under health insurance, and that just fluctuates. And all of this that I'm talking about is health insurance, either for employees that are working outside of the school system or retirees. The school system, their health insurance is carried within their own line, but active employees all through fiscal 13, we had between 53 and 54 employees, active employees covered under health insurance. This entire fiscal year, we've had 49. Why we have 49, I don't know. We have people that are on their spouse's insurance, or, well, that's pretty much what they would be doing, because we haven't made any reductions. We do have a few more retirees, but we have our retiree health insurance plans renewed on January 1st as a result of moving everything over to the federal program. So we're on a January 1st renewal rather than a July 1st renewal. We had to make an estimate on what we thought that renewal would be as of January 1st, and it's significantly less than what we estimated. Currently, January through June, we expect to be paying about $20,000 less in health insurance premiums as a result, mostly because of that January premium renewal. So that's significant. You will see when you receive my budget for fiscal 15 that I'm projecting that we will spend a significant amount less in 15 on health insurance than in 14. But, you know, where's that happening? Where's that happening other than in the town of Lunenburg? And that's because of the aggressive approach both the board and the Public Employee Committee has taken with respect to health insurance. I haven't heard what our renewal will be yet, but at the Maya annual meeting, at the MMA meeting, the renewal range was announced, and at this point, my recollection is it was 0 to 9, and 5.3 was the average, and I believe we will be less than the average, but I don't have that firm commitment yet. So we're doing very well in the current fiscal year, even with the overages, you know, assuming the winter isn't, and we're on the eve of a storm, but assuming the winter isn't significantly different than it has been, I do expect that we will be able to cover any of the overages we have in the budget within the existing appropriation, mostly because of our health insurance savings.
Any questions for the town manager? No. No appointments, reappointments. Our next meeting, next Tuesday, February 11th, right here at 7 p.m. And again, we will be town managerless. Rudderless.
Rudderless.
We will stray in every direction, I'm sure. Any final public comment from the board?
Got a couple. The governor's budget was revealed, I guess.
To you in a dream.
One of a better word I could think of.
Nor the man behind the curtain.
Yeah. And the State Senator Flanagan had sent a note, or her office had, given us the news on it, given an outline of what the governor proposed, and offered that she would be fighting to actually increase state aid to the towns. Again, this year, the governor has decided to marginally increase Chapter 70 school funding, while flatlining unrestricted government aid, other funding resources of town. You know, of course, the reality of that is if we bring in less money from the state and the town side, that means there's less money available on the town side to give to the schools. So there's no real benefit to anybody in this, other than politically it probably looks good to somebody somewhere. So I had sent an email to Senator Flanagan thanking her for her efforts in trying to protect our state aid, increase state aid. I think we all should do that. I think we really need to be taking a look at the state. You know, revenues are increasing dramatically, and yet somehow it's not making its way back to the town for operational budgets. So just, I applaud her efforts. I hope she has some success, and I just don't want people thinking that, oh, it's great, there's more money coming into the schools, because it really isn't.
And just on another part of the plan, which is disappointing last year, was that there was transportation bond bill was passed, and yet the governor withheld $100 million that never got dispersed to the towns for doing road repair. They have now put it back in the budget again, and I certainly hope that that gets utilized to its fullest because, you know, given the weather, the extreme weather of this year being so cold for a spell and then so warm, I mean, you could see in certain places already the wear and tear on the road. So nobody could explain why the budget wasn't, that bond bill wasn't fully expended last year, and I certainly hope it does this year, because if ever the need exists.
I can explain it.
Explain it, please.
At the MMA meeting, I attended a session that the governor showed up unexpectedly, but the session was an update on the state budget, and the Secretary of A&F, Glenn Shore, was the speaker, as was the Director of the Department of Revenue. But the Secretary of A&F made it perfectly clear that the governor had no intention of releasing that additional $100 million, that $300 million number that he supported was predicated on additional taxes that didn't materialize. So he was not going to be releasing that additional funding, and it wasn't. He was very definite about that.
Well, and it wasn't. If that was the case, then I don't have any reason to disbelieve it. But it certainly wasn't communicated. Number one, and there was still a bit large portion put into the rainy day fund that certainly could have paid for some of it. So. There was certainly a lot of skepticism about why it wasn't released. I'm glad to hear an explanation, because I don't think anything was offered except that he didn't want to release it. So,
One more thing?
Yes.
Just want to take a minute to acknowledge and just note the passing of Bob Miklebek. He was fairly new to town, been here a few years. He, someone I was just getting to know with his efforts for the schools, PTO, the building, and for him to, his sudden passing kind of blew me away when I heard about it. So I just want to recognize his efforts for the town. It's going to be a big loss because he was just getting started. And to his family, my condolences.
Agreed. I think we're all speechless. Any other public comment from the board? Any public comment from the public? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Good night, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you. For a full list of Sustainer production